Hey guys, welcome back to Cutting Edge EDC. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the support in the comments and the likes on the videos. I really appreciate every bit of support that we've gotten. And if you're new to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on this video and drop us a comment. We appreciate all the feedback that we get. It helps us make better videos for you guys. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Microtech Stitch. We're going to be taking a look at both of them. So we've got the auto up on top, and then we've got the ram lock down here on the bottom. There are some notable differences between these knives, and I want to talk about which one. Honestly, I'm just going to get down to it and talk about which one I like better. But we're going to talk about both of them. Spoiler alert, I like both of them, but there is one that I prefer, and we'll get into that later in the video. Not going to get super technical with the specs and everything. We'll kind of do an overview real quick and then get into some of the differences and what I feel are some of the strong points with these knives. Both knives are going to be coming in at about 8.5 inches. As a matter of fact, the Ramlock version is exactly 8.5 inches. The Auto is going to be 8.75 inches, so just a hair longer, and all of that extra length is in the blade. Handles are exactly the same length. Obviously, this uses an automatic action, and this uses a manual crossbar lock. The ram lock, which is absolutely stellar. Love the ram lock. They're both going to be using Torx, which is great. T20 for the pivot and T8 for the body screws. And look at the other side here. The clip screws are also going to be a T8. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can look at some of the differences between these two knives. So as I mentioned before, the blade on the Auto is going to be just a hair longer, and that is not the only difference in size between these two. If we put them right next to each other, you can see that you are getting a thicker blade with the Auto. That difference is going to be about a 1/16 of an inch. So I think the Ramlock is right at an 1/8 of an inch, and the Auto is going to be 3/16. It's enough that you can tell when you pick it up. As far as the general profile of the blade, they're very similar. So some differences that you're going to notice in the actual shape of the blade between the Ramlock and the Auto is there's no sharpening choil on the Ramlock. There is on the Auto. Also, the swedge has a little more of a sweep to it on the Auto, and the Ramlock is going to still got the sweep, but for whatever reason, they decided to kind of tone that down a little bit on the ram lock. The handle on the Auto is aluminum. It is hard anodized black aluminum, and there's no milling on the inside of that aluminum, if you're curious about that sort of thing. So this knife is a little bit heavier than the Ramlock. The Ramlock has got G10, and there is a steel, it's like a half frame inside of that G10. And then, of course, on both of them, you're going to have the backspacer, which I believe is titanium. But I don't actually know that for sure. So I'm not going to say that with 100% confidence. Let's get into the ram lock a little bit and understand what we're looking at here. So the ram lock is a crossbar lock, but it is very unlike most crossbar locks. So kind of the quintessential crossbar lock that most people think of is the axis lock that you'll find on primarily Benchmades. The axis lock is great. I actually have right here. I've got, by the way, thank you to Braden Hull. It's my buddy. He actually helps with the channel. But he provided me several knives to take a look at, and we'll be looking at some of them. But here we've got the axis lock versus the ram lock. And the main difference that you're going to notice right off the bat is size. The ram lock is substantial. I mean, that is just a huge piece of steel right there. To call it a crossbar lock undersells it a little bit. It's like a cross brick. I mean, that thing is sizable. But the more important distinction with the ram lock is where the spring is at and what type of spring. So if you know what to look for, you can see the Omega spring in this lock right here. So the Omega spring is shaped like an Omega symbol. That's why it's called that. And it wraps around and it comes down here and it does a little loop-de-deal and secures into the frame of the knife. And they work, but they don't always work. Omega springs are well known for failing after a lot of repetitions. And that's because you have a piece of spring steel that is doing this direction and then going that direction and then turning back that direction. And it's a lot of different stress points on that spring. If I had my tools handy, I would take this thing apart and show you the Omega springs, but I don't. So you're just going to have to imagine with me. I'll try to go back and throw in a photo of an Omega spring. Try to superimpose it on the video so that you can see what I'm talking about. When we look at the ram lock, what you see back there is a coil spring. So the benefit of a coil spring is that all of the force is moving in the same direction on the spring, meaning that force applied at the front of the spring is matched by the rest of the spring, meaning that you have an even dispersal of tension across the entire spring. So it makes it a much stronger spring. There's a reason that we use coil springs in vehicles. We use leaf springs too, and I'm really excited for the leaf spring lock when Microtech comes out with that. That's a joke. I don't think they're going to do that. But anyways, coil spring is going to be a lot sturdier than the Omega spring. And inside of that coil spring, there's a little rod that guides the lock, and it pushes it forward onto the tang of the blade, which has this little shoulder right here. It's got another one on the bottom for the detent, and flicks open, and you've got a solid lockup. Feels like a fixed blade. There is absolutely zero play, zero movement. It is a super solid lockup every time. Let's see, just for fun. Now I gotta say, this mini bug out with the Flytanium handles is actually super solid. The action is great, and the lockup is, especially for a Benchmade, phenomenal. We may come back and do a review of this one later on, but for now, we're going to put that up. A lot of the axis lock knives that I've have had some play in the locked position, but that one doesn't, so it gets a pass. Anyways, that's the ram lock. It's fair that everyone is excited about the ram lock. It is absolutely phenomenal. So just a really excellent job by Microtech on the RAM lock. And I love the switch. I like how they just kind of transferred over the aesthetics from the OTF switches and put it on that RAM lock. The auto. Well, I don't think we need to talk a whole lot about how the auto works because it works like pretty much every other auto. You push the button and the thing comes flying out of there. Um, Lockup on the auto is, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a tiny bit of lock rock. Still really solid, but there is definitely more movement on the auto than you get with the RAM lock. This this thing is, I mean, it is just an absolute tank of a knife. Um, so we can't spend much time talking about the um, the mechanics because there's just not a whole lot to talk about on the auto. But there are some things I want to talk about. I mentioned before the sharpening choil that is present on the auto, and it is not on the RAM lock. That does two things. One, it gives you a sharpening choil, which you can use to sharpen your knife. And if you sharpen your knife properly over time, um, that eventually is going to take material off the blade. And the choil allows that to grind down more naturally without messing up your blade. And it gives it a more natural look over time rather than winding up with, I'm sure you've seen, grandpa's old knife where he's sharpened it enough times that the blade has kind of a curve to it. And that's something that you can kind of avoid with the sharpening choil. But not only does it do that, but it also, they included this little uh, sweep right here, which you have the same general shape on the ram lock, but you can see there your finger is resting right against the back of the blade. And if you're not careful, you can definitely cut yourself on the back of the blade right there. It is sharp. I can understand why they did this because even with a sharpening choil, what you have is you have defined features rear, um, you know, south of the sharpening surface. So the cutting edge is going to be filed away essentially over time by your diamond stones, and eventually you're going to wind up with less blade here, and obviously you're not going to be sharpening this, and so you will notice a difference if you sharpen this thing enough times. By in not including the sharpening choil and by not including any defined features uh, behind this cutting edge, what you can avoid is that unnatural look, because as you sharpen this, just everything is going to go away equally. So I understand that, but you definitely gain an ergonomic advantage by having that sharpening choil and then having that nice flat place to put your thumb, or index finger rather, right behind it. The ergos are better on the auto. Ergos on the ram lock are good, but they're better on the auto. I actually think the handle feels, yeah. So I think the handle, you're actually going to have some more girth on the handle with the auto. Let me pull out the tape measure and see if I can actually measure a difference here. So we've got 1/2 inch width versus, if I can squint one eye. So similar to the width of the the thickness of the blade, the thickness of the handle is going to be an additional like 1/16 of an inch by my calculations, which should be taken with a grain of salt. But the ergos on the auto are definitely better in my opinion. Which one, if I could only have one, would I have? It would be the auto. I think it's great. The thicker blade, the little extra weight to it. Um, I just think it's cooler. Also, they changed this on the later versions of the Ramlock stitch, but on this particular version that I have, where are the screws? They're underneath the G10. Why? I don't know. But I there's something that makes me uncomfortable uh, when I look at the handle and it's missing screws. So if it's going to be missing screws, I want it to be because I forgot to put them in or something. Just go ahead and give me all the screws and let me make my decisions on my own. The automatic um, Microtech stitch is going to be the winner for me. The grip on the handle is phenomenal. I know they've got newer versions of the Ramlock that have the frag, and there are some that have the fluting, and those are cool. I like them a lot. I'll probably buy one at some point. But the texturing, that trilene texturing on the automatic stitch is just excellent. So, sorry, I know this is kind of a long video, but these are two knives that I like a lot, and so I wanted to take some time and talk about them. Between the two, I'd be picking the Auto Stitch, and you can pick one of these up every now and then when they're in stock for, let me see if I can pull up a price here. So you can pick one of these up for just a hair over $400 from a dealer. You can pick them up on the used market for significantly less than that, but you got to go find them. So all that to say, Microtech Stitch is an excellent design. So big thanks to Borka for coming up with it in the first place, and Microtech for picking it up to give us some really cool knives to play around with. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, please like, follow, and comment. We appreciate all of that, and you guys have a good one.